Anxiety makes everything that would be, not a big deal to a normal person the end of the world. It causes everything to be just ridiculously overblown, and stress can be caused by everything. It makes it impossible to do things that you otherwise would have no problem doing. It eliminates your ability to think correctly.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Jeff Turley, board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and this is the Educator's Guide to Emotional and Behavioral Challenges.
I'm Vinny Searcy, and I'm a clinical educator. I've worked in both suburban and urban schools for over 15 years as a school adjustment counselor, school psychologist, and special education administrator.
Anxiety is an experience. It's a universal experience to all animals with complex brains. It's hardwired into our system. It's a survival function that is preserved by evolution. Animals without a well-developed fear response don't survive long enough to reproduce, so fearless genes are culled from the genome fairly quickly. Anxiety can be defined as a psychological state akin to fear, similar to fear, but based on anticipation of danger or memory of danger.
And sometimes when I think about like a test, like my stomach like really hurts and I got a headache. Like kind of like right now, I'm kind of feeling kind of sick and like I might throw up, be sick.
Anger can become a real big part of it too. Anger at myself and others. I shift blame, trying to figure out who's responsible for what's happening to me. At times when I was alone, I would just scream endlessly, just to maybe think that that would help.
Threat is perceived by the brain in milliseconds. If the brain, specifically two little knots, one on either side, called the amygdala, perceive threat, they send an alarm signal to the rest of the body almost instantaneously. Blood's diverted from structures in the body where it's not particularly needed in the moment, like the intestines, to the skeletal muscles, so that you can fight, run, or freeze. The pupils dilate so that you can see better in low light conditions. Breathing intensifies and becomes rapid and deep. The blood needs more oxygen.
Like this afternoon I had a test in math. Oh, it was so bad. The entire morning I just, felt like I was going to throw up. Like you see me here, I'm getting so hot and nervous. I don't like being anxious. It's not a good thing.
So when blood's diverted from the gastrointestinal system, the stomach and the intestines, butterflies doesn't even come close to describing it. Whoa, you get that sinking feeling.
Yeah, it made me feel sick nearly constantly, which, I had trouble eating a lot, and that caused a lot of problems too.
Higher brain functionings, where the thinking goes on in the brain, up here in the cortex. Blood's diverted from that area of the brain and shunted to the central parts of the brain that run on pure emotion.
I took AP Calculus and I did just fine. And in my anxious period, my last breakdown, I could barely add or subtract. I could not remember what 5 times 7 was. I could not, anything that required any calculation or any logical thought was just lost on me.
Elementary school, everyone else was like playing, and I was just sitting there like, what am I going to have to do, for homework tonight? Elementary school homework, there's nothing, but why was I worrying?
So fear is a good thing. Fear is essential to survival. You don't live long without being able to be afraid. Anxiety is another matter. We also need some anxiety to drive performance. Without enough anxiety, people just tend to hang out. Anxiety has both conscious and unconscious elements.
I would convince myself that I was incapable of things, and I wouldn't even give myself a chance to try. And then when I forced myself to try, it was true. I couldn't do it. And I believed that that was permanent, that that was me, but that was really just my brain in that state.
Let's face it, anxiety is not that difficult to understand because everyone experiences it. We all know what anxiety feels like. But clinical anxiety is not benign. It can lead to major problems later in life for children. Depression, substance abuse problems, even suicide.
To be totally honest, I had some near suicidal episodes. It was not good for me. It's unhealthy and dangerous.
Even though it's a universal experience we've all felt, it's not always that easy to detect. Because sometimes the most anxious person in your midst is somebody that's completely off of your radar screen.
Most teachers didn't even notice what was going on with me, which is understandable. They have a lot of students. But some teachers really did notice something was wrong, and one or two actually did pull me aside and ask me if something was wrong. And at the time, of course, I couldn't really say much of anything because I had trouble describing what was happening to me because I was in the middle of it. But those few teachers who did show concern really did help, and it was very helpful even just knowing that they noticed and cared.
I think educators, we have such an agenda. We have to move from here to here in 180 days. So we kind of can forget what anxiety looks like for children, or that these children do have lots of anxiety. I think we really just need to become sensitive and think of a time when we've had anxiety and what's helped us and what's worked for us, because a lot of times I think we're just so, caught where we are, like we need to do this, testing for this, that we kind of tend, or I'll admit that sometimes there have been times when I've, forgotten that there are more needs than just the academic piece. And I think if we can go back and make teachers aware of that, then I think that would somehow at least make them sensitive to students with anxiety or trauma or emotional disabilities. And I think that's kind of...
Now that you might have an idea what anxiety is, let me tell you what it's not. It's not cowardice. I was a psychiatrist in the United States Air Force for a number of years. I saw a lot of dependent children, spouses, some service members, but the most rare of my patients were fighter pilots. You know what, the only thing that would bring a fighter pilot in to see a psychiatrist, you got to bear in mind, these guys, the last person they want to talk to is a psychiatrist. Anxiety would bring them in. And these are brave guys. These are guys that fly jets at supersonic speeds, land in extreme conditions, and subject themselves to combat. Something stressful typically would emerge in their lives. A new baby, perhaps a divorce, death of a parent, and following that stressor, some would develop anxiety that was sometimes disabling. So these guys who feared being grounded and not being able to do what they've trained for years, one of the few things that would bring them into the office was anxiety. The Surgeon General's report on mental illness states that 1 child in 8 has a diagnosable anxiety disorder. It's a lot of kids. If you have a class of 25 students, that would mean on average you have 3 with anxiety disorders. What are the anxiety disorders and how common are they? We give this cluster of syndromes several names. They all share common characteristics, but there are distinct types of anxiety disorders and subtly different treatment approaches. The anxiety disorders are generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, social phobia, and simple phobias. Perhaps the granddaddy of all anxiety disorders is panic disorder. This is the spontaneous onset of intense fear and all of the associated behaviors that come with that. Remember, this means persistent and impairing anxiety, not simply the anxiety that all of us experience from time to time. Anxious children tend to be tense, unhappy, and vulnerable to depression, and they're not always easy to be around.
Yeah, I think originally when I first started teaching, and it can still happen now when you don't know the student well, say in September, but you're like, oh my gosh, why is he so angry? Or it looks oppositional when it's anxiety driven.
As you probably already know, anxiousness, anxiety disorders consume inordinate amounts of time. Educating the anxious student is an especially difficult challenge. He is distressed, worried, on edge, ready to treat any threat as a threat to his actual survival, and he doesn't even know it, because the perception is going on deep in the brain outside of rational thought. What you see is he can't show his distress for what it is, because that takes mature skills in social communication. Think about how hard it is for yourself, for any of us, to put words to intense internal emotional states, especially when a part of your brain is telling you, the pit of your brain is telling you to freeze, run, or fight it out. Do you know somebody who has trouble communicating rationally about intense internal emotional states?
Well, I don't like being called a douchebag, but I probably could have handled that one better.
Once you understand the problem, really understand the problem at a human level, you can use your natural empathy to help an anxious student who is struggling.
I realized I don't know this kid very well, and so I started asking around. I asked Deanna, who had him last year. She indicated that surprised the heck out of her. Made me start to think, maybe there's something in there I need to be probing deeper on.
On the other hand, if you make a lot of assumptions and you're harboring a lot of unchallenged negative thoughts in your own mind about the student, about his problem, about her parents, about the impact of this problem on you, you also have a tremendous amount of power to make things worse. Once you recognize anxiety for what it really is, you're well on your way to doing your part to improve the situation of an anxious student. Because you've felt anxiety yourself. In fact, as you think about this topic, you might be feeling some right now. Luckily, there are a few straightforward things that you can do to make things better. And they don't cost much time, money, or expertise.
The only way I was really able to manage anxiety was by sticking close to people who care about me. The best thing for me was to have people close to me helping me get through it, and that really made a huge difference.
In part one of this episode, we discussed some of the biological, psychological, and social aspects of anxiety in the school setting. Now it's time to talk about a few of the practical things that you can do to limit the impact of anxiety on your students' education, on the smooth operation of your school, and on your own sanity.